And we'll go ahead and start letting people in. And then start seeing what's going on. Oh, and you're okay with me recording?
Yeah, absolutely. Record away.
Okay.
The more benefit, the better.
Yes.
Plus, they're pretty pictures, so.
I love your presentation. Your presentation is always one of my favorites. So, hi everybody. We're going to let you get in and get comfortable. We'll enable the chat for YouTube soon. I just need to kind of get some things going, and then I'll get that live chat going so you can send questions in. You can use the chat. Lindsay Hirt is with us right now, and she is a very interactive presenter. And so she'll be asking you some questions that she'll want answers for. You can do that in the chat. You can also use the Q&A to send questions. And I just want to say that Lindsay has been with this program since the beginning. She was one of our very first presenters and has stayed a partner with us. And I just appreciate her very much. You're going to love her presentation. She's very entertaining and she's a wonderful human. And I'm just going to stop now because you want to learn from Lindsay. All right. Bye.
Well, that's nice of you to say. And also, I feel like I have big shoes to fill, though, because there have been some absolutely incredible presenters. Great job on getting those together. Okay, so welcome everybody to my presentation about whales and all things marine right here on Cape Cod, Massachusetts. And I know some of you are near and some of you are far, but it is an absolutely incredible environment. So I would be really remiss in avoiding talking about marine life on the eastern seaboard of North America, because there's a lot of really cool stuff happening here and it's a big part of biodiversity. So let's dive in. I'm going to share my screen with all and we'll get started here from the beginning. So hopefully everybody can see this.
Yes, we can.
All right. Excellent. Super. So before I really truly begin, I just want to let everybody know that although I have some what will seem like really cool photographs to you, especially if you've perhaps never seen a whale before, there are many, many better photographers than myself. So that's how cool whales are. You may see some really amazing pictures here and say, wow, I really think they're so great. But there are many better photographers than myself. I'm just one of those people who holds the camera and holds down the shutter for a really, really long time. And for every 1,000 photos I take, I might get one or two really good ones. And that was just based on pure luck. Photography is not my game. So today we are talking about tales from Cape Cod, both the story kind and the flippy kind. I am Lindsay Hirt, and I have been so blessed to be able to grace the screens for National Biodiversity Teach-In since its inception. I'm really happy and lucky to be here, so thank you so much to Deb and the whole gang for working so hard on this effort. I think it's really important. I am a marine biologist and science teacher from the iconic area known as Cape Cod, which is a little hook, a peninsula off of the side of the United States on the eastern seaboard. So I'm going to show you a little map of that. But before I do, this very cute picture that we have here on the front of our screen is a whale watch calf or baby whale that was born in 2015, and it's only about 25 feet long. That's it, just a little baby. So hopefully you can all still see my screen. I'm here on Cape Cod, Massachusetts. The blue arrow will show us where we are in the grand scheme of things. It seems like a tiny place, but what is really, really incredible about it is that it's this peninsula that sort of directs a really great stream of water around it. And it's very, very biodiverse with different types of plants and animals and other organisms because of the amount of nutrients that's in the area. So if you look in the lower left hand of the screen here, there's this blue square that sort of zones in on the area I'm talking about. I'm off the coast of the state of Massachusetts. And this region called Cape Cod, where the hook is a nice big peninsula, which houses this big bowl left by a glacier that melted many years ago and left behind these really shallow waters. And directly above that, there's sort of a rectangular space, what we call a bank, which is really like a mountain with the top cut off. It's a sandy bank. And it's very shallow. To us as humans, not so much, but to whales and other sea creatures, not very deep at all, only a few hundred feet deep at its deepest spot. And this area is known as Stellwagen Bank. It has been deemed a national marine sanctuary for the fact that it is very, very important to biodiversity. It houses, sometimes for just small amounts of time, but it houses many different types of sea creatures. And we get each season an influx and a migration in and out of different types of creatures, and those do include some whales. Thankfully, because we have the Gulf Stream depositing warm water here, and even though it's a very cooler northeastern region, we have lots and lots of oxygen there, flushing things out, and we have this condition that we call upwelling that sort of cycles all of the water to come to the surface and bring with it all of the dense nutrients that sort of settle onto the ocean floor there. And that creates what's almost like an aquatic garden. And that's really important to biodiversity because it creates the nutrient availability and the food space for there to be lots and lots of things for larger organisms to eat. So when you consider yourself a whale and you're looking for a grocery store, it turns out that Stellwagen Bank National Marine Sanctuary is actually a really good place to go. So here today, what I'd like to do is offer everybody sort of a virtual whale watch. I want you to get a sense of what I see when I go out on trips in this area called Stellwagen Bank National Marine Sanctuary. And right here is a picture of my very favorite boat, the Tales of the Sea, great play on words, and also my very favorite whale, a whale named Nile. So if you were imagining yourself going out to sea, you would be taking a boat like this. Now it's a little bit more COVID safe. People are wearing masks and there are fewer folks on these boats the last season, but hopefully we'll be able to get back to bigger crowds in the future. But imagine yourself on a boat like this. So I'd like to ask, and hopefully there are some folks in the chat who might want to answer, has anybody been on a whale watch before? If you have, shout out right now and let me know with a thumbs up or a yes. If you haven't, I'd like to hear about that too, because that might sort of inform what kind of things you might like to learn today or what kind of questions that you might have about whales. So I see a couple people raising hands. You've seen a whale before? How about those that have not seen a whale before? A couple more folks in the chat here. Yes, some of you, yes, some not yet. Well, if you haven't seen a whale yet, that's quite all right because today might be your lucky day. So let's take a ride. So here in Stellwagen Bank, we've got lots of different sea creatures, and some of them are very, very small, like the smallest plankton and even unicellular organisms. And they make up the biggest biomass, the most amount of the actual food base is there. And this is because there's lots of oxygen and lots of nutrients in this shallow water. And the sun penetrates that shallow water and allows there to be tons and tons of growth, just like if you put fertilizer in your own garden behind your house. Sometimes even the largest creatures, like you see here, these pictures were taken right in a Cape Cod area. You see some very large animals like the basking shark, which can be larger than a school bus at 30 feet long. That's this guy on the left right here. And they look like they're really scary, but they're not so much. They actually eat the smallest type of seafood in the ocean that you can find, the smallest planktons and phytoplankton and zooplankton, the plant and animal free floating little tiny organisms that are in the water there. And to the right of it is one of my very favorites. Those of you who are YouTube fanatics might actually know about a video called, I think it's called, It's a Baby Whale Jay. It's not a baby whale at all. This guy right here on the right side of the lower screen is called a mola mola or ocean sunfish. And some marine biologists actually classify them as plankton as well, because even though they do have flippers, they don't really have the capability to swim really hard freely. They sort of float along with the current and the tide. And so they're sort of a large form, like a megaplankton themselves. But that's a couple of types of creatures that you can find in the ocean, and they're pretty strange looking, if I do say so myself. We also see another fairly large predator and marine mammal in our area, and those are seals. There are many different kinds of seals, but I chose this one, the gray seal, as sort of our prime suspect for the region because they are fun and they are numerous. And they are also a little bit a source of contention for some of our local folks. Some who love them because they're really cute and they remind us of dogs, and some who are not a huge fan because they tend to be spicy stealers of fish from our local fishermen. But we do see them everywhere here because the biodiversity of the region supports that. Has anyone out there seen a seal before? If so, feel free to shout out. I'd love to hear from you. Now, seals are a version of a marine mammal that we'll be talking about today. They are not quite whale-like, but some of the great things about them is that they also share a lot of the same characteristics that whales do. That being that they are mammals, which means they have warm blood and they breathe from lungs. They produce live babies. Their young are born alive and they feed them milk. And they also, if you can see in this upper portion of the screen here, they do have hair. They're wet, so it's a little bit slick looking and hard to see, but they've got whiskers around their eyebrows and around their nostrils. And they also have a fine hair that covers their body as well, so which is a mark of mammals. So we also see another type of incredible mammal that lives here in New England off the coast of Cape Cod. And they're not always here year round, but many different types of cold water species of dolphins exist here. And my very favorite is this beautiful dolphin that is striped on the side. They're called the Atlantic white-sided dolphin. If you live on the West Coast and you've been lucky enough to see dolphins, you might see another version, a slightly different species, and these ones called the Pacific white-sided dolphins. And they're really cute. I love this photograph here. I know it's a bit grainy because I've blown it up, but hopefully those of you that are present with me today can see that there is a baby in the mix here. There's multiple dolphins here, and our rule of thumb when it comes to observing dolphins in the wild is that whatever you see on top, there's a whole lot more on bottom. So usually when I estimate what I see at the surface, maybe there's 5 or 10 or 15 animals, there's usually at least 5 times as many beneath the water. So can all of you see that there's a little baby dolphin right in the middle here among its pod, little tiny dolphin. That dolphin there is only about 3 feet long or so. So just some beautiful, beautiful sea creatures, as many different kinds here on the eastern seaboard and up in Stellwagen Bank. But my favorite, if I can even possibly pick a favorite, would be the humpback whale, which is sort of an icon of New England. They are well known to people all around the world. And part of the reason why is because they actually are circumglobal, which means they can be seen all across the planet in oceans all around the world, from the coldest waters to the warmest waters. And that is because there's many different populations of the same species that breed with each other. So here in New England, we have a North Atlantic population that spends part of its year up here in the colder waters, closer to the New England area where there's lots of cold water and high oxygen. And it's a great place for them to eat. As you can see, the whale on your screen right now has a big, wide, open mouth. And there are some birds that are coming in to try to swoop in and see if they can take a little snack from them. So that's only part of the year, though. At another time of the year, these animals are migrating down the coast and to warmer waters, where instead of eating things, they're doing something else. They're looking for somebody to hang out with. They're looking for a mate. They're looking to breed. So these are animals that travel and they go different places to do different things at different times of the year. That's called migration. There's always a purpose for it. The landing zone, the destination that they go to, is going to be dependent on what the needs of the season are. So here's our humpback whale. I want to tell you a little bit about humpback whales. I really think that they're just so fantastic for so many reasons. They're gregarious and interesting and special in so many ways. They also have this natural curiosity, which makes them sort of an ideal species to whale watch. It also comes with its own set of problems, which we'll talk a little bit about later, but mostly because of their natural curiosity. If you learn how to safely do it, you can spend time with an animal like this and sort of get to know them in their own environment, which is really cool. So whales, we call them cetaceans. You may have heard in a science class, if you've ever been learning taxonomy, you may have classified them as within the order Cetacea. And Cetacea is that word that makes us think of whales. The classification of these animals is really important. It helps to describe the vast biodiversity or the vast numbers of species that there are within the whales, dolphins, and porpoises groups. There's an indication that relates their degree of relatedness when we can describe what order that they are in. And then, so within the order Cetacea, we have another suborder, another group beneath it called Mystacidae. And so we're going to be focusing on the Mystacidae today. Mystacidae translates to mustached whales. And if you remember the photo before this, you might have noticed there was something really strange hanging down from the mouth of that whale. So here's that object again. I'm showing you a couple of views of some of the things that I see when I'm on a whale watch. Right here, we have two whales that have surfaced, and I'm watching them from my whale watch boat. We're looking at the baleen, which is that furry looking stuff that is hanging down from the top of the mouth there. And in between it, there's this pink strip. If you touch the roof of your mouth with your tongue, you'll be able to feel that same pink strip. Does anyone know what that's called? It's an area that you get really bad pizza burn if you take a bite of pizza too quickly. And interestingly enough, it looks very different on humpback whales and other whales than it does for us. So that's called a palate. It's a hallmark of the type of animal that you see here. The kind of feeding that mustachioed whales do, or the Mystacidae, is different than you and I using a fork and stabbing it into a bite of food and then putting it in our mouth and chewing. There's no teeth here, and so therefore we're not chewing. Humpback whales are so large, they can extend past even 50 feet long, but one bite of food at a time really isn't gonna do it. And so what you end up having is lots and lots of food going in all at once, and they have to use a mechanism to filter it out. So the way that you might think of the baleen, which are these large furry looking plates that are hanging down from the upper jawline there, is like the bars of a jail cell. These whales can open up their mouths, unhinge them almost to this wide, wide way, and they encompass a whole bunch of water with their prey species, the food that they're eating, which is typically a small schooling fish, and they turn their throats into something like a balloon or like a bullfrog. You've probably seen the bullfrog sort of blowing up their throat. And it expands and it expands and expands. And that expansion is only allowed by a very specific type of slit that you see in the lower jaw here. Can everybody see those lines that almost make them look like pleats of a pants? Those are called rorquals or pleats. And our humpback whales have them so that they can expand their lower jaw like a balloon. They do this to accommodate lots of water, sometimes to the tune of 500 gallons. And they do that so that any of the food that's in it can get swallowed up, and they spit out and filter out the water through the baleen plates, which hang down like bars of a jail cell. It's really, really kind of a cool way of feeding. A little later, I'm going to show you a couple of little clips or GIFs that I took so you can get a sense of how they do that. But for now, what you just need to know is that you're only looking right now at the mouths of the animal, the upper jaw, where the baleen hangs down, the palate, that skinny pink part, which is the roof of the mouth. A lot of people actually confuse that with the tongue, and it's not the tongue. Whales do have a tongue, but that's not it. And then the lower jaw, the dentary, which contains this expanded skin here that holds the rorquals. Let's see if I can go on to the next slide here. Okay. So the next important thing that we see a lot of when we go on whale watches, and actually maybe the first thing you ever do see when you come across a whale, is going to be, there she blows, the view of the blowhole. As I mentioned before, all whales, including humpbacks, are mammals. And so they don't have gills like fish do. They have lungs, an extremely large, powerful set of lungs that will blow you away. But it doesn't really make sense for them to open up their mouth and take in a huge gasp of air, does it? Because you saw how they just feed. They need to open their mouths in a huge way. And so instead, over time, these animals have evolved their nose from being in the front of their face to go all the way up to the back and the dorsal side, the top of their body. And that is where their blowholes sit. It's very similar to the same setup. It almost looks like a nose here, doesn't it? Where there's a set of nostrils, or as we call them, nares, in which the air, the warm, hot, extremely powerful blast of air comes from the lungs of the whale. And oftentimes when they're ejecting this air, they're exhaling at the surface, and there's going to be some water around the area, and that creates this sort of misty spray that you can see from sometimes miles away. And so in the upper left-hand corner here, you may notice there's two whales here. Both of their noses, or the front of their face, their rostrum is headed towards the left of the screen. And behind it, you'll see this big swoopy bump here, and that's where the blowholes are sitting. So the one in the front is not exhaling at the moment, maybe inhaling in fact, and the one behind is exhaling, and you can see this big tall column of mist. That is the blow, or as you might know it, the spout of a whale, which is actually not a spout at all. It's not like a water fountain. It's the air, the warm, hot air that's coming from the lungs of the whale and going into the cooler oceanic air that creates this sort of condensed look of a blowhole. Pretty cool stuff. So moving on down the body of the whale, I'm going to show you the whole thing in the end, I promise. We have the flippers. So flippers are kind of like your arms. In humpback whale world, we call these the big wings. And in fact, their scientific name, which is Megaptera novaengliae, translates to the big-winged New Englander. And although whales are actually seen all around the world, the humpback whales, the ones that seem to be the most famous are the ones from New England, where back in the 1970s, when people started to recognize that they actually could be identified individually, there were some really serious research efforts that began to happen. And because the focus was on the migrating whales from the north to the south, and they were always returning to New England, they decided to give them a name, the big-winged New Englander. And the wings are referring to these humongous flippers that you see here that attach from the shoulder joint. They extend out very far. And of all of the 80 to 90 plus species of whales, dolphins, and porpoises, humpback whales actually have the longest appendage, the longest limb in the whole animal kingdom. It's about a third of the size of the body, with most of our average humpback whales being between 45 and 50 feet long, or more than 2 school buses long. We're looking at one flipper being at least 15 feet long. That's pretty incredible. So this is another thing that when you're out to sea looking for whales across the horizon, you could look across the horizon and maybe not see the whole whale itself, but they might be engaged in an activity called flipper slapping, in which they're flapping their flippers up above the water. If you see a long white strip like this, it usually indicates there's a humpback whale in the area. So moving on down, even further down the body of the humpback whale, is the back end. This area that you're seeing extending from the water is a humpback whale lifting its enormous tail and muscular backside out of the water straight up and down. The tail itself is also known as a fluke. And so if you're looking at whale tail patterns, which are really exciting to talk about, we're going to get to those soon too, you'll often notice that they're called flukes. The really muscular region, which is sort of the trunk of the animal behind the heart and down into where the intestines and reproductive parts are, this area is called the tail stalk, and it's really muscular. without all the muscle in that space, humpback whales wouldn't be able to make the migration that they do, which is sometimes hundreds and even thousands of miles long. So here is the humpback whale fluke identification part. Who here has ever seen a humpback whale's tail live and in person? Share away or give me a like if you have. I would love to hear about it. Anyone in chat, feel free to let me know what you're seeing. Yes, there's the whale tail. There are many different patterns we will come to see. And these are just two. I actually have a couple with me that I'd really like to show you. So before we move on, I'm going to do that and come out of my share. Humpback whale identification is really the best way to do it is through the patterns that you see on the tail. And so I would like to show everybody a couple. Hopefully I'm now off screen share and you can see this big model right here is a whale tail or fluke that is entirely white. Some of you may have heard of the famous whale called Migaloo, which actually does not live in North American or New England waters, but is a famous white humpback whale. Humpback whale tails or flukes can range in their color or pigmentation from very, very white to very, very black, and anything at all in between with all kinds of really interesting and fancy markings. And so when we start to get to know the whales who can sometimes visit the same place over and over again, we get a sense of what those tail patterns are. There's another pattern on the tail that we can find that might not just have to do with its color. Can anybody guess what that pattern might be? I'll take your guesses in the chat. What pattern might you see in a humpback whale tail besides the color itself? Ooh, indentations. That's a really great word. And actually, there are some indentations on this whale. You can probably see them here. All of these little marks that you see, these little curves and swoops and dents that are on the trailing edge or the end of the whale tail would be positioned in the water.
So like in the chat, I'm hearing. Oops, sorry, I've got this thing going. I apologize. I'm listening to you in two places.
Okay.
I love the different patterns. Great model. So many indentations. Splotchy checkerboard. And then I'm going to put in from YouTube. Somebody has a story about a whale they saw. So I'll put that in the chat.
I would love to hear about that. Yes, please do. I'm sorry, I'm not paying attention to Facebook and to YouTube at this moment in time, but any messages that are from there, I would love to see them. I'd like to model for you what a whale tail looks like when it's actually swimming. Instead of a side-to-side pattern, like a fish, so this would be like a fish side to side, or a shark, it acts a bit more like a mermaid, up and down. And so the rest of the body would be behind, and the back end of the whale, or the trailing edge, is where you end up seeing this pattern that we call serrations. You may have not ever heard of the word serration in terms of a scientific sort of discussion, but you've probably seen them on a knife, like a scalloped knife that you maybe cut meat with, a serrated knife. There are some birds out there, like the mergansers, that have a serrated beak, in which they have these little indentations and sharp spots. And the interesting thing about them is not only are humpback whales known for their pattern, they're also known by their individual serrations, which on each individual humpback whale are entirely different. So even if you don't see the rest of the whale, oftentimes you can get a really, really good sense of what the whale looks like or who they are based on those serrations. I'd like to take a quick second and plug my friend and wonderful colleague, Richard Dolan, who is not only an incredible whale watch naturalist, but also an absolutely amazing woodworker and painter. He's an artist who made this for me. This is another fluke true to my very favorite whale, whose name is Nile. So Nile has some very particular swoops and points in her serrations, but she also has one marking that makes her who she is. That's this big lightning bolt looking stripe right here on the side of her fluke. And that is how she got her name, because it reminds scientists of the River Nile. Nile's a great example of a whale who is a mostly black fluke. This one is modeled after several different whales, actually, who have a mostly white fluke. So you can see there's a really big difference there. Even though the animals look almost the same, well, the pigmentation on the tail is not so much. So I see that there's a story from YouTube here. I'm going to just read it really quick. We were so close to the whales off the Oregon coast that we smelled its breath from the blowing our way. It was unbelievably stinky. That's probably, I would say that's probably going to be a memorable time, even if it's kind of gross. Humpback whales, like I mentioned before, they have these enormous lungs. And what is their diet made of? It's fish, stinky, nasty fish. And whales don't brush their teeth. So anytime that they're going to be expelling air in this very, very powerful way, if the wind is right, you might catch the breath coming in your direction. It is a very common practice for my captain on the Tales of the Sea. As soon as a whale breathes, he goes like this with his shirt and tries to avoid the stench that emanates from the whale's blowhole. So I love that story. I hope you have some pictures to match. I'm going to reshare my screen here. And I'm going to come back to the whale tail identification. So fluke or tail patterns, very important to identify whales. And whale watch naturalists like myself and other researchers who take pictures of these whales and record them are often lucky enough to see the whale as they dive down and take a picture of that tail. The serrations too can oftentimes be a really helpful indicator of who the animal is. So I'm going to move on to the next piece of whale identification here. The tails are the primary way, or the flukes are the primary way to identify a humpback whale and learn a little bit more about its life history or its story. A secondary and oftentimes even better way to identify whales is based on either the shape of their fin, which is on their back, the dorsal part of their body. And that can vary greatly from triangular to square to hooked or falcate, or sometimes it's got chunks of it missing. So that's really helpful information to sort of recognize the same whale who returns to us summer after summer when they're there for their feeding. Another way to recognize the whale, unfortunately, can be from some scars. And so I've included a couple of pictures here. One of my very favorite whales who has visited for decades off of the coast of Cape Cod, a whale named Venom, who was actually named for two little fang-like marks on the left-hand side of her fluke, but unfortunately got entangled in some fishing gear some time ago and lost a portion of her right fluke. Some of you could probably see that she's missing a good chunk of her tail there. And below, there's a whale that has some scars in its back it's a pretty specific scar pattern. And oftentimes it's a great confirmer to see a photo like that and match it up with the tail if you know the history of the whale from previous times. So it seems like it would be really, really easy to match a whale to its tail. And I have to say, some of the most frustrating times of my life have been when I worked with different organizations. For example, when I did some work with the whale and dolphin conservation, and we were looking to match whales that we were seeing out at sea to whales that we had seen prior. We tend to have this problem. It can be the weather. It can be our positioning. It can be that the whale is very far away from us, or our camera messes up, or our batteries die, or the picture comes out too blurry, or there's splashing happening, or the whale just isn't quite positioned right. So what we see here, and if you've seen this particular slide before, I've actually used it in past presentations because I love it so much. It's not because I'm trying to copy myself over and over again, but I just love it so much. Don't give away the answer if you know it already, friends. But if you're new to this, I'd like you to give yourself a quick challenge here. Match the flukes if you can. Right here, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different photos of whales taken on different days in different weather and in different sea conditions, from mirror, calm, flat to kind of rough waters to very cloudy to nice, clear, sunny, bright, shiny days. So take a think for just a second here and see if you can picture how many whales are actually in this picture. Are some of them repeated, or are they all different whales? When you have an idea, give me a sense in the chat. And in the meantime, please do appreciate the fact that there's some really interesting patterns here. They're just not all very easy to see. And let's see what you come up with. Now, just as a reminder, I've been matching whales for the better part of a decade and a half. And there's often times that I absolutely mess up how many whales I have in an area, because some of them go under and they come back up and I see a different angle of them. Or perhaps, geez, the whale didn't actually show its tail. Or maybe that scar looks a little bit different. So I've got a few guesses here. I have had some people say, oh, you're trying to trick me. There's only one whale, but it's just different angles and you can't tell. Well, it's a bit more obvious than that. We see a big variation in fluke patterns here. The pigmentation or the color fill-in from very white to black is really different. One of my old favorite whales on the far right in the middle here is a whale named Gladiator, who has this pattern right at the base of its tail that looks like a shadow of a human holding up a sword or a spear and like a shield. I don't know how easily you can sort of visualize that, but most of our whales are named after different types of patterns that they have that remind the scientists of a certain shape or like icon or idea. Like we have a whale named Division that has a big slash across one area that looks like a division sign. That's one example. Another, and might be appropriate now, where we're coming up on Valentine's Day weekend, a lovely and easy to recognize whale is one named Valentine, who looks like she has a big black heart right in the middle of her tail. So it's hard to sort of visualize who's who here, but I'm going to tell you, it is 4. And so what I've done is matched the colors for the same individual whales. You'll notice, depending on the camera, the weather, the positioning, the behavior. Ew, really? That yellow whale up top is really the same as the whale down below? Well, if you start to match some of the serrations and the positioning of them, you might be able to use one form of matching that helps to confirm another. And in actuality, most humpback whale analyzers or fluke matchers, they will try to match 5 points to confirm that a whale is the same, because there's lots of patterns out there, but some of them can look really very similar. I wonder how many of you out there may have been stumped by that number. It's kind of hard to believe that a whale that's green here, that with the green outline in the middle, is the same as the whale in the lower left-hand corner. It almost doesn't seem like it, does it? So another great thing and really entertaining thing about humpback whales that we can learn from is their behaviors. And even if you've never seen a whale before, you probably at some point in your life may have seen an advertisement or a David Attenborough documentary where you saw some really incredibly cool behavior. My personal favorite is always going to be this incredible thrusting skyward of the entire body, in which the whale is propelling itself out of the water. That's called breaching. I have listed a few types of behaviors here. It's certainly not inclusive, but one of the great ways that people who study whales as their passion or as their job, they spend a lot of time analyzing behavior, because it tells us a lot about how whales interact with one another. And it tells us a lot about what they're trying to accomplish and their life history. And it also helps us to see how they fit into their environment and what kind of role that they have there. One of the huge hallmarks about humpback whales is the fact that they like to spy hop. Now, they're not the only type of whale that does this. You may see it in smaller whales. Some of our toothed whales, like dolphins, will pop their head up out of the water. But hopefully you can appreciate here that what you're looking at right now is just the very tip of the nose with all those little bumps on it of the humpback whale. And you can see on the right-hand side there, there's a line on the right-hand side of the body there, and that is the break between the upper jaw and the lower jaw. What we're really looking at here is the chinny chin of the whale, and you can almost kind of appreciate the stripes going down the side. Those are the rorquals, or those ventral, the grooves, the pleats that expand when the whale takes on a bunch of water and food. That's one type of behavior. Another I mentioned before, and is a really, really fun one, can be heard and seen from often miles away, and that is flipper slapping. Humpback whales are really well known for doing this, and it's really easy to see them do it too, because usually, not always, but usually their pectoral flippers are very white looking, and so they really show quite starkly against the horizon. Whales also love to roll and play. One of the great momentous memories that we have as naturalists on whale watch boats in the summer on Cape Cod is to watch the calves play, because Stellwagen Bank, our National Marine Sanctuary, is a great location where the moms who give birth to their calves in the warm waters of the Caribbean travel up the coast with their young, their calves, and then they use Stellwagen Bank as sort of a nursery where they teach them all kinds of life tips to survive, how to eat, how to avoid predators, what are the best ways to swim. And in between all of that learning, my goodness, the calves, they just need to let out some energy, right? And so they will often flipper slap or approach boats, and they're very curious, and they will also roll over on their sides and sort of present themselves to us, which is a very special thing to happen. We also see quite a bit of feeding. As I mentioned early in this presentation, humpback whales are incredible filter feeders, and they have this structure in their mouth called baleen, which is made of the same stuff as your fingernails, the keratin, the same stuff as your hair, keratin, a protein that is really strong and flexible, and it acts like a barrier to keep the fish out of going back into the water, but allowing the water to stream out of the mouth again. And one of the great ways that they enjoy feeding, it's a really cool mechanism of how they do it, is the humpback whales will blow huge streams of bubbles, either in a cloud or as a wall. And they sometimes do this on their own, and they sometimes do it in groups where they sort of cooperate together to feed. And that big blowing of bubbles, what we call bubble net feeding, actually acts as a barrier that simply scares and crowds fish together in a more dense way. And then the humpback whale can come up right through the middle and take a big, huge bite of those fish and filter out all the water. It's really interesting feeding. So I'm going to show another GIF here of a similar type of activity where the mouth is coming open. A lot of times with humpback whales, especially in Stellwagen Bank, we will see the mouth open at the surface, but sometimes we don't. Sometimes whales will feed in depth, deeper in the water column, or even on the bottom. And this one I really love, when we powerfully lunge out of the water with a big open mouth and then dive right back down again. This might be a good opportunity for those of you who have never seen a whale in the wild before to appreciate the parts that you're going to see. Unless they're full throttle jumping out of the water, you may only get one little teeny piece of the whale at a time, like the dorsal fin, or maybe you'll just see the blowhole and the splash guard that covers over it. Or you might see just a little piece of the rostrum or face, the front of the whale there. And sometimes you don't actually see a whale at all, but just the splashing of water or the bubbling up from where they're feeding. So it's a great opportunity to kind of learn how to see if you can identify the fact that there's an animal in the water without actually seeing the whole animal. We're looking for signs, and that's a great way to really practice your observation skills as a scientist. I have to say though, breaching, boom, that behavior of coming out of the water, that might be the most exciting of all. And it creates a splash that can be heard for miles and miles away in the water. Perhaps some of you have seen whale behaviors in the past, and if you have, I would love to hear about them. Either comments on YouTube, or if you have pictures or stories, you're welcome to add them to the comment stream on the Facebook, or you're welcome to chat about them here in our chat, and I'd love to address some of your thoughts on behaviors and the parts of the whale. So today, what I've kind of done is gone a little deeper on the information about humpback whales, but I've also addressed the fact that there are many different types of organisms that live in the sea. And our particular coastal ecosystem here off the coast of Cape Cod, where there is a bank with lots and lots of vibrant life, is a very supportive way to show that there's balance in the ecosystem. So right now, what I'm asking you to do is think about all of the animals that you've ever seen or heard of in the water, all of the relationships that you might know about, all of the times that you've ever been to the beach. And I want you to think about what makes a healthy ecosystem. What makes a healthy ocean? What are the hallmarks of having a really, really balanced, healthy place? And if you have any thoughts on that, whether it's that it's an area that's trash free, or it's an area that has a lot of oxygen, or it's a place where maybe no people ever go, tell me what your thoughts are about what is a healthy ocean. Really think about this, because it might mean something different to everybody. I'd love to hear from you, so go ahead and comment. So my first comment here that I see is that a healthy ecosystem is one that is biodiverse. How appropriate, since we are in the National Biodiversity Teach-In, and we are studying and thinking about and chatting about and highlighting and celebrating things that are biodiverse, or ecosystems that are biodiverse. What does that mean? It means that there are many different types of living things, and not just one. Other comments I'm seeing here. So large biodiversity in the ecosystem from Austin. This is a great comment. Lots of oxygen in the water. That's really, really important. If we have lots of oxygen in the water, it means that you've got an option to grow things. And a big basis for plant life is the fact that they need a lot of oxygen. And for animals to thrive, there's going to be lots and lots of oxygen in the water to help to grow things. That's really important. Clean water. That's a really good comment someone from YouTube mentioned. You need to have clean water. Now, I think it's also important to mention that when it comes to cleanliness and pollution, which of course is always been a concern in our minds, but now more than ever, because the population of our planet is growing and growing and growing, and we're using more and more natural resources, not all of our water is going to be clean. There used to be a term, or I guess I'll say a saying from way back before we had the environmental revolution, where people realized it was kind of time to start thinking about saving the planet and preserving what we have. The solution to pollution is dilution. What that means is if you just keep throwing some trash and junk in the water or around, eventually it will just go away and disappear. And that's not the case, is it? It definitely isn't. We need to be mindful. However, I have to say that as someone who lives in a very biodiverse area with really important keystone species and lots of biodiversity, that our ocean is a resilient thing. It has responded to some types of impact that have not been so great, and it has learned to sort of bounce back. But there's a tipping point with that. You can only get so far when you start to impact the planet. And so we should all really be thinking about what a healthy ocean is and how we can make it better. One of the things that I have noticed about studying humpback whales in this beautiful, important space called Stellwagen Bank here off the coast of Cape Cod is that whales are an important part of that. And so I've placed here just a couple of things to be thinking about in the ocean. Half of all Americans live in coastal watersheds, really, really close to the ocean. And so we impact those spaces. And we use the ocean not only for things like going to the beach and recreation, but also for food, for transporting things. There's lots and lots of traffic and ships out there. We study it to find better sources of medicine and energy. And so there's no way that we're not going to affect the ocean. So it's nice to know that humpback whales, like many of the other biodiverse organisms that live in the ocean, are really, really important to biodiversity. And therefore, there's something that they really should be protected. They have a role in our environment. I have named some here, and I'm wondering if anybody else in the chat might be able to think of any reasons why humpback whales might be important as a natural resource. I'll just go ahead and offer one myself. Without humpback whales, I probably would not have a job being able to work on a whale watch boat all summer and enjoying time where I can photograph and talk about whales all summer long. I would really miss that if they went extinct or didn't exist. So that's a really important part for me, which not only involves recreation, but also economy. If I wasn't able to make a little bit of money and have a job with whales, it would be a tougher time. I'd have to go find something else to do, right? Whales have become a little bit of a canary in a coal mine, and I know that term is overused. Some of you in high school, maybe you 11th and 12th graders out there, have talked about this idea that there are different sentinel species that are sort of markers for ocean health. We often refer to them as the canary in the coal mine. They're something that tells us that there's something wrong. And when we start to see whales do things that they shouldn't, like die in large numbers in an unusual mortality event, or one washes ashore and it has certain problems or things attached to it that it shouldn't, that's a really important marker to show us that there are some things that we could probably do better. They're also a really historical and cultural symbol of this area of New England, and that's really important to me. It might not be to you if you live in maybe Nebraska or some place where that's really not coastal, but whales can be found all over the world, and they tell a lot of stories. It's interesting. I see from our chat, somebody mentioned that whales can become a food source for bottom feeders once they die. That's an amazing observation, and one that has been newly studied in a big way recently. Humpback whales, we call the space that they take up when they die, we call that whale fall, where if they don't wash ashore or get eaten by things at the surface, the rest of their carcass will float to the bottom of the ocean and become a space for other creatures to live. And sort of piggybacking on that, a YouTube question, do whales balance the food web of an ocean? They sure do. Although they seem like they're a top predator, there's actually things that eat whales, like sharks. And those things can eat whales when they're alive, or they can eat them when they're dead. But whales themselves actually really contribute to the food web. And the reason why is because they themselves pump out an awful lot of nutrients in the form of poop. They eat so much, sometimes a ton a day. I don't mean like a ton like you ate a ton of pizza last night. I mean, they literally eat 1 ton of food or more a day. Some of our larger species, like the blue whale, even more than that. A ton is 2,000 pounds. If you're eating stuff, you're absorbing some energy, but you're also turning over a lot of nutrients and defecating some out. Defecation, by the way, really amazing behavior to see in humpback whales on the water. Poop is definitely nutrients available for other things. So that kind of brings me to the end of today's presentation about humpback whales and our virtual whale watch. And I want to invite anyone who would like to please feel free to continue to ask questions in the chat. I'll be hopping onto YouTube later and Facebook to address more written questions if you have them. And of course, I am going to open up to you my email, if you so choose and would like it. I can be found at lindsay.hirt@maritime.edu. If anybody has any questions about project ideas they'd like to do, research they'd like to get involved in, where you might like to take a whale watch, I'm more than happy to chat about whales. It's sort of my jam. I'm seeing a question coming in from Donna. Thanks for asking this. Are there virtual whale watches? Yes, there are lots of virtual whale watches. Of course, you can always attend one of mine. I love doing presentations, but I don't want to shamelessly self-plug. So let me mention that there are some incredible whale organizations related to conservation, preservation, research, which of course helps to drive good science, and education. Some of them locally in our area, I mean, my local, Cape Cod, Massachusetts, Boston, are the New England Aquarium, who has a wonderful program on whales, and they often do online presentations. They have an associated whale watch company that works with them. Boston Harbor Whale Watch are really, really incredible. And there's an amazing research organization that's been doing great work since the inception of humpback whale studies in the 1970s, and they are known as the Center of Coastal Studies in Provincetown, Massachusetts. You can look online at any time and join Facebook groups that are special interest groups to join some of these kinds of conversations. There are many things happening right now, especially with COVID in mind. We've got a lot more happening online to sort of present good information to folks who are interested. I think I saw one recently from really incredible, responsible and well-known organization, Oceana, is conducting a virtual whale watch. I might be making this up, but I'm pretty sure it's March 3rd. So many options for that. And if you're having trouble finding something, then I certainly invite you to reach out to me, and I'll kind of connect you to an organization who might be able to give you what you're looking for. There's a ton of information out there. I see another question coming in from YouTube. Have any new species of whales been discovered lately? Yes, yes, yes. One of the great things about our vast and wonderful ocean is that it really makes up what we know as a blue planet, not a green one. And since about 75% of our planet is covered in water, and we've yet to discover only, I think we've covered about 5% of what is in the ocean in terms of the space that we've yet to explore, new species of all kinds of things, invertebrates and vertebrates alike, are being discovered. I mean, we only know about what we know about because there's so much yet more to observe. So even though we think we have an excellent handle on classifying and understanding our whales, it turns out that once we start investigating things like photos and morphometrics, which is like the measurements of whales, and their genetics, looking at their genome and how that is spaced out, it turns out there's actually more species and subspecies there than we realized. And one was very, very recently, in the last few weeks, discovered that we thought was a whale called the Brutus whale, and it turns out it's not. So rather than telling you more about that, I would like you to go look that up on your own and see if you can find out what kind of whale was confused with the Brutus whale. It looks like Bride's whale, but we say it differently, BRYDE'. It was once thought that this particular type of whale was a Brutus whale, but it's actually something else entirely, a brand new species. Another few questions here before we wrap up. Do you feel whale watching is damaging to whales? I think that is an absolutely large topic of conversation, and maybe a day for another panel that we can talk about. But I will say this, by and large, I think it's a wonderful thing to connect people to their community and to connect people to the ocean. Because the more you have an emotional connection and a solidly good memory with something like a whale watch, the more you're likely to care. And when you care about something like that, you're probably going to be more invested in protecting it. And so overall, I feel that whale watching is very helpful for learning about the animals and for helping to protect and preserve them. That said, you need to be involved in a responsible whale watching organization. You can't just drive around like a crazy cowboy out there and hope that you're going to find them. You might hit one on the way. So it's really important that you drive carefully do your research, or buy a ticket with an organization who is a responsible whale watching company that can help you understand the best ways to preserve and conserve such really precious animals. I'm seeing that there's a few more questions related to continuing ed on whales. Do you have any ocean exploration books or marine science books you recommend? And I do, but I don't want to plug one over another. I will say that my favorite whale photographer is a guy named Brian Skerry. You might want to look him up, Skerry. He has an incredible book coming out on whales fairly soon and has taken incredible photographs. There are many documentaries about whales, and I kind of am a David Attenborough type of person. But if you have not looked at the most recent, I want to say I think it came out in 2019, but there's a nice Netflix miniseries out called Our Planet, and there's some really amazing footage of drones with whales in that one. But there are many. And if you really just want to start at the beginning, I might consider directing you towards Roger Payne's work on the Song of the Whale and see where you get with that. If you have more questions or want more specific direction, feel free to email me directly or find me on social media, and I'll be happy to give you lots and lots of options. There's so many out there. And the reason why is because whales are so incredible and they're easy to connect to, and they're these amazing sentient beings that have intelligence and personality and social structure. And I think overall, we can really learn a lot more from them. So that's it from me, everybody. If anyone has any questions, again, I invite you to join me anytime. So I'm going to stop my screen share here. And thank you so much for joining me today at Nat Bio Teach-In. I really hope that you all had a good time. And I certainly hope that you will be working your way towards learning more about biodiversity, and in doing so, doing something to make sure that it stays put.
And make sure you do go to the YouTube, Lindsay, because there's a lot of love for you there.
Awesome. I will definitely check it out. Thank you so much, Debbie.
No problem. Well, we appreciate you so much, and hope we can get you back next year. And I wish you well in all of your endeavors. And thanks everyone for being here, and we'll see you next week.
All right. Sounds great. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful weekend.